Distinguished participants, ladies and gentlemen, welcome to web seminar titled The Role of Women Negotiators and Mediators in the Maintenance of Regional Peace and Security. On behalf of the organizing committee, we would like to thank all of you for joining our web seminar. Without further ado, we would like to invite Mr. Jose Tavares, Director General for ASEAN Cooperation of the Ministry of Foreign Affairs of the Republic of Indonesia, to convey his report.
Thank you.
Director General, the screen is yours.
Thank you. Minister for Foreign Affairs of the Republic of Indonesia, Ibu Retno Marsudi, distinguished speakers, ladies and gentlemen, it is an honor for me to report to you on the web seminar entitled The Role of Women Negotiators and Mediators in the Maintenance of Regional Peace and Security. Allow me to take this opportunity to extend our sincere appreciation to all the prominent, experienced female speakers from different backgrounds in promoting women, peace, and security. Inspired by the recent developments in Southeast Asian region, as well as recognizing the fact that there needs to be more dialogues as avenue where women can constructively discuss peace and security issues. Hence, Ibu Retno Marsudi came about with this initiative to do a short yet evocative 3-sessional web seminar on the role of women negotiators and mediators in the maintenance of regional peace and security. The objectives of this web seminar is twofold, namely to discuss relevant issues related to women, peace and security in the region, to identify possible way forward in order to develop more regular interactions among interested parties on these issues. Some key topics that will be the focus of each session are, among others, identifying new and emerging issues related to women, peace and security in Southeast Asia, and the role of mediators and negotiators that women can play in regional peace processes. Sharing lessons learned and best practices from other regional women mediator networks to increase the participation, profile, and influence of women peace processes, women in peace processes, exploring ways to enhance the capacity of women mediators and negotiators in Southeast Asia. I am pleased to report that we have an excellent lineup of speakers at the webinar today. The speakers of the first session are multi-sectoral female experts from the region who are widely known for their experience, their knowledge, and works in promoting women, peace, and security, either at the community, national, regional, and even global levels. The panelists in the second session are all women who have been directly involved at the peace table, either as negotiator or mediator. The speakers at the third session are representatives of other regional organizations, Regional Women Mediators Network, namely FemWise Africa, Women Mediators Across the Commonwealth, Mediterranean Women Mediators Network, and Nordic Women Mediators. If I may inform all of the participants and Ibu Retno that we have over 830 registered participants who are diverse from every aspects and walks of life from the region as well as across the world. I also wish to point out that this webinar is organized by a group of our young female diplomats and civil servants from the ministry. Allow me to use this opportunity to thank our all-female organizing committee in preparing, coordinating, and executing this webinar. This is truly a concrete initiative where we can proudly say that Indonesian women support other women in the region and beyond. Without further ado, ladies and gentlemen, please join me in welcoming Ibu Retno Marsudi, Minister for Foreign Affairs of the Republic of Indonesia, to deliver her keynote address. Thank you.
Well, thank you very much, Mr. Director General. Colleagues, distinguished participants, first of course, welcome and thank you very much for taking part in this webinar. The issue of peace, women, peace, and security is one of the priorities of the Indonesian foreign policy. Not only stop in Indonesia, but I also try to mainstream this issue in ASEAN. And Indonesia is also trying very hard to be more active on this issue at the global level. Colleagues, ladies and gentlemen, last year, Indonesia convened a regional training for women, peace, and security to strengthen the capacity of 60 young women diplomats from the region in the peacemaking process. I was very encouraged to see their passion and active contribution. They are future mediators for our region. This training was part of a bigger plan to establish Southeast Asia network of women peace negotiators and mediators later this year. It is about time that our region has a network of its own. Other regions already have their own women mediators network like Africa, Arab, the Mediterranean, the Nordic, and the Commonwealth. So this webinar will explore ideas on the possible contribution of Southeast Asia network of women peace negotiators and mediators to our peace and to our regional peace and security. Distinguished participant colleagues, I was in Afghanistan earlier this year. So it was in end of February, early March. That is before the pandemic and all the shutdowns. I traveled all the way to Kabul for one reason. That is for women issue. Together with 5 Indonesian prominent women, I inaugurated the first meeting of the Afghanistan Indonesia Women Solidarity Network. During the visit, I had the chance to have a warm and heart-to-heart conversation with Afghan women. I was touched by their determination to play an active role in their country's peace process. They refuse to only be the victim of the conflict and aspire to be the agent of peace. Indonesia is committed to continue giving our best support to Afghan women to their active participation in charting the future of their countries. Colleagues, ladies and gentlemen, I believe women are equal to peace and peace is equal to women. Women participation increases the probability of a peace agreement lasting 15 years by 35%. However, we see different realities on the ground. Until 2018, women constitute only 13% of negotiators, 3% of mediators, and 4% of signatories in major peace processes. Women only made up around 6% of personnel in the UN peace operation. This is very unfortunate. And we are losing a bigger chance of peace if women are not provided equal opportunity. Our world is full of uncertainties right now, and it will likely continue after this pandemic is over. Conflict continues in many parts of the world, and last year, armed conflict kill and injure more than 20,000 civilians. Often, women and children are the largest casualties. Rivalries between great power intensify, and trust between countries are diminishing. The future of international cooperation is being questioned. More countries are turning to unilateralism, undermining rule-based order and international law. If it is not managed well, all of these are seeds of conflict. So the need for more peacemakers will be more apparent in the coming years, and we must include more women, not only in time of conflicts, but throughout the whole spectrum of peace, from preventive to resolution. Distinguished participants, to achieve this goal, I have 3 points to share with you. First is changing the culture and mindset. Many societies still have a structural barrier in their community, so the education is very important in raising awareness and understanding on the contribution of women to peace and security. The support of our closest people is imperative because without the support of our family, without the support for my family, I will not be where I am now. Next, we have to change the mindset of our male counterparts, convince them that together we can. The government must create a safe and enabling environment for women to contribute concretely to the society. And most importantly, when women are given the opportunity to lead, they must also empower other women. Second, enhancing the capacity. Women have unique skill and perspective to offer to peace process and post-conflict peace building. Constant improvement on the capacity, experience, and credential of this pool of women experts is needed. This is the reasoning behind our regional training last year, to become the first training ground for ASEAN women aspiring to become mediators. So after all, who knows the dynamics in our region better than us? This brings me to my last point, that is fostering the like-minded networks. Such network will provide mentoring opportunities, exchanges of lesson learned, training, and other form of collaboration. I hope our region's women mediator networks that we will establish can be a part of this global alliance and reinforce the existing ASEAN Women Peace Registry. Distinguished colleagues and participants, before closing, I would like to quote Article 1 of the Universal Declaration of Human Rights. All human beings are born free and equal in dignity and rights. This is the legacy of a woman negotiator, Ms. Hansa Mehta from India. She fought hard to insert it, replacing the original phrase, all men are born free and equal, to be all human beings are born free and equal in dignity and rights. So we must live with the same courage and determination, striving to contribute better to our world, and I believe we can. So I wish you a constructive and fruitful webinar, and I hereby declare this webinar officially open. I thank you very much.
Okay. Thank you, Excellency, for your keynote address. We will now start the first session of the web seminar titled New and Emerging Women, Peace and Security Issues in Southeast Asia and the Role of Women Mediators and Negotiators. Before we start, we would like to kindly inform all of you that the question and answer session is open to all participants. Questions can be asked through the Zoom chat features for those joining from Zoom, whereas others can address their question through our Twitter and YouTube comment box. The Twitter and YouTube account can be seen on the screen. Now, without further ado, we would like to invite Mr. Faisal Cherry Siddhartha, Director for ASEAN Political Security Cooperation, Ministry of Foreign Affairs of the Republic of Indonesia, to moderate the session. Moderator, the screen is yours.
Thank you, MC. Distinguished participants, ladies and gentlemen, it's a pleasure for me to be here virtually with everyone. For this first session of the web seminar, we will be focusing our discussion on women, peace, and security issues in Southeast Asia, as well as broader security issues for women. This particular topic is interesting and timely as we are celebrating the 20th anniversary of the UN Security Council Resolution number 1325. Our speakers today in this session will be sharing their views and observation on the international, regional, and national efforts to enhance women's equal, full, and effective participation at all stages of peace process, given their indispensable role in the prevention and resolution of conflict, peace building, and peacekeeping as embodied in the UN Security Council Resolution number 1325 and subsequent resolutions, as well as the role of women mediators and negotiators in this regard. Ibu Grata, as the first speaker in our session, will start the discussion by giving an overview on UN Security Council Resolution number 1325 on women, peace, and security and subsequent resolutions, and update us on how the UN encourages member states and regions to fully implement Resolution 1325. She will also touch upon the contribution of female peacekeepers as well as integration of Resolution 1325 in Southeast Asia. Whereas our second speaker, Mrs. Motuzar, will take a regional approach and share her views on how this region supports the WPS agenda by, among others, establishing the ASEAN Women Peace Registry. Speaker three will focus on the multilateral level, such as the negotiation process of the Resolution 1325, her experience as members of the UN Secretary General High Level Advisory Board and on mediation, as well as UN's effort to encourage member states and regions to fully implement Resolution 1325. That would be Dr. Nolin Heiser. And our last speaker in this session is Ibu Fitriani, and she will be discussing the process and experience of Indonesia and the Philippines as the only countries in this region that has a national action plan on the WPS agenda. She will also share her observation on barriers faced by women, emerging security issues for women, as well as implementation of WPS in Southeast Asia and other issues as well. Before I give the screen to our first speaker, allow me to briefly introduce our panelists of speakers. Mrs. Grata Verde Nintias is the Director for International Security and Disarmament of the Ministry of Foreign Affairs of the Republic of Indonesia. Ibu Grata is a career diplomat who happens to be also my colleague and my good friend, and is currently a member of the UN Group of Governmental Experts on Advancing Responsible State Behavior in Cybersecurity in the context of international security for period of 2019 to 2020. In 2011, she served as the Vice President of the UNICEF Executive Board. Our second speaker is Mrs. Mo Tuzar, coordinator of the Myanmar Study Program of ASEAN's Yusof Ishak Institute and member of the ASEAN Women for Peace Registry. Mrs. Mo is a fellow at the ISEAS Yusof Ishak Institute in Singapore, where she coordinates the ISEAS Myanmar studies with an extensive background and experience working at the ASEAN Secretariat. Mrs. Mo's research focus are mostly on ASEAN, Myanmar, and the WPS issues. She is currently also an AWPR member from Singapore. Our third speaker is Dr. Nolin Heiser, member of the UN Secretary General's High-Level Advisory Board on Mediation. From 2007 to 2015, Dr. Nolin was appointed the Executive Secretary of the UN Economic and Social Commission for Asia and the Pacific. Prior to that, she became its longest-serving Executive Director for the United Nations Development Fund for Women, or UNIFEM. In 2013, Dr. Nolin was also appointed as the United Nations Secretary General's Special Advisor for Timor-Leste, working to support peace building, state building, and sustainable development. Our fourth speaker is Dr. Fitriani Bintang Timur from the Center for Strategic and International Studies in Jakarta. Dr. Fitriani is a researcher in the center since 2017, being a scholar with 10 years of experience in gender politics, security, and defense studies. Her research focus includes in defense and security, Indonesian politics and foreign policy, women in peace and security, and specializes in women participation in international peacekeeping operation. So there, they are our four speakers in this session. Without further ado, allow me to invite our first speaker, Mrs. Grata Werdanintias. Ms. Grata, you may have the screen.
Good afternoon, everybody. Thank you, Pak Cherry, for the short introduction to this very timely discussion. I'm actually quite honored to be in the presence of some of the leading figures, women who are championing WPS agenda in the region, Ibu Nolin, Mo, and also my dear friend, Ibu Fitri. It's been an honor to be in the same session with you all. Now, dear participant, last year I was with Minister Retno attending the launching of the Global Alliance of Regional Women Mediators Networks. Now, the launching itself, it's quite memorable because it is, for me, it's a rising recognition on the role of women mediator and negotiator in conflict areas. But it also shows that the WPS agenda has steadily, although it's not fast enough for some of our women, that steadily made progress and has moved forward. Now the webinar is very timely because this year we will celebrate the 20th anniversary of UN Security Council Resolution 1325 as the first Security Council resolution that linked women to issue peace and security. But also it's an opportunity for us to again recommit ourselves to effort contributing a wider recognition of women participation in peace processes. May I have my presentation, please? Okay. Now, maybe to the next slide. The next slide, please. Okay. Now, just let me take the opportunity to look again what the why 1325 have been a significant timeline in our effort to promote women participation in peace processes. Now, when we talk about a woman in a conflict situation, we always projected woman as an object to be protected as part of the vulnerable group. But in realities, however, sometimes women are the one who first notice the rising tension in their own community and sometimes play an important role in decreasing the tension before it's escalated further. And in some exceptional cases during conflict, women even act as the first responder to mobilize their community in response to the adverse impact of conflict, be it violence, hunger, or even the other form of violation of human rights. Now, the adoption of 1325 is a very important landmark in women, peace, and security, where we are committed to shifting the paradigm of women as a victim of conflict to empowering them as agent of peace. It's also an important measure to push forward on active involvement of women in peace and security decision making. So there is a big difference here. And also promoting women's role as the part of the solution in conflict situation. It is also recognized as one of the most comprehensive resolution talking about women, peace, and security, because if we look at all the resolution in the past before 1325, yes, the woman issue has been mentioned, has been in the resolution, but it's never been seen as a comprehensive comprehensive view of women in conflict. The resolution consists of 4 pillars. When we start talking about the woman's role in prevention, participation, protection, in even to relief and recovery in the aftermath of conflict. And it also promote women direct involvement in the peace and security. And most importantly, the role of women, the context of the role of women are no longer confined in the socio-economic aspect of conflict and peace, but also in terms of the political process itself. So this is why WPS make a lot of huge drive toward woman participation in peace process. As Minister Retno earlier mentioned in her opening remark, there is no doubt that the involvement of women in peace process leads to a more sustainable peace. He quoted the IPI research about the woman participation increase the likelihood of sustained peace and up to 35%. So we are agreed that given the chance, women can contribute positively in promoting peace. So it is imperative that women have a meaningful and substantial participation to the peace process. When we talk about substantial and meaningful participation, we not only bind ourselves on increasing the number of women in the table of the peace negotiation, but also making sure that women are equipped with the necessary and set of skill and expertise needed to be able to deliver in the peace process as well. Now, next slide, please. Now, the reality is the number is really remain very low. Ibu Retno has already quoted some of the finding made by the Council of Foreign Relations about the number of women in peace processes. But of course, when we talk about women in peace and in conflict situation, we should also look at the role of female peacekeeper, for example. Now, it's also an area of challenge in improving the number of female peacekeeper. Now, according to the latest data from the UNDPO, female peacekeeper currently constitute only 6% of all uniform military, police, and justice, and even correctional officer in the whole spectrum of UN peace operation. Indonesia only currently deploys almost 160 women personnel, and we are strive to increase both number and capacity of our female peacekeeper. And it is notable to mention that last year, for the first time, we break the ceiling by having more than 100 female peacekeeper after our participation in UN peacekeepers since 1950. So this is also a very important development in Indonesia. Of course, this is also got to do with the reform process that is happening in our own security sectors, institution and agency that can provide more women in the sector that can contribute at the global level as peacekeeper. Now, on women mediator and negotiator, we only have only a handful of women involved in the recent formal peace process. For example, we only have one woman in Helsinki process, only 3 women active in peace process in Malino, first Malino conference in Poso, and also only 3 women again in the second Malino process in Maluku. So there is at the domestic level, there is a big challenge on how, if Indonesia would like to contribute meaningfully in the region, on how we are going to improve the number, but also the skill, and also try to develop some of the best practices and the lesson of the former women who are formerly involved in all the peace process that I mentioned earlier. Now, let me just again reiterate some of the argument why it is important to have women as mediator and negotiator. Yes, I think the best argument is that women and men are impacted differently in conflict. Therefore, in order to create a comprehensive and sustained peace settlement, we have to be able to address different security and also peace building needs, especially those needed by women. And involvement of women in peace process also will bring a broader perspective. And the most importantly, by increasing inclusivity and diversity, the peace negotiation may be able to address a more wider range of concern, and some of those concerns is actually will becoming the pillar that can sustain peace longer. As I mentioned earlier, of course, women have a unique perspective and approach. Women will have a better situational awareness because they are more involved in a different aspect in their community. They have more understanding on what their community needed, what their immediate family needed, what are their children needed, what are the elderly, the disability needed in the aftermath of the conflict. Also, the presence of women, of course, will be able to provide a safe environment for victims of the conflict to be heard in the peace process negotiation, for example. So women there be able to facilitate some of the violation that need to be redressed in order to make peace lasting. And more importantly, women in the peace process table are the ones who are in the best position to determine their own path of empowerment in the peace, in the aftermath of the conflict. So having women on the table is, of course, a powerful, and for me, I mean, it's a powerful and a cost-effective preventive tool. It can help to prevent the recurrence of conflict, because we are also talking and dealing with those, by having women, we are able to talk and deal with those root causes of the conflict itself. Next, please. Now, so what is the WPS agenda in Southeast Asia region? This is also something that we have to look to give WPS discussion more, have a regional sense and regional wide perspective. Now, if we look at our region, of course, the security challenge in our region is multidimensional. We are not only talking about the existing communal conflict or communal tension, we are also talking of other non-traditional security challenge. For example, the international organized crime and even the terrorism challenge in our region. Now, the issue terrorism, for example, is given a new dimension when we are talking about the role of women, not only in countering terrorism, but also the reality that there is more women who are participated as perpetrator in the terrorist act itself. So this is giving us a new dimension and a more layer on how we look women in terms of security challenge in our region. And also, if we look at our region, I think, like most country in the region, Indonesia also find that there is a persisting obstacle in promoting women voice and women participation in peace processes. Of course, Ibu Retno has mentioned some of the persisting challenge and persisting obstacle, but of course predominantly is the patriarchy social system that still shape the nature of peace and security issues in our region. And also we talk about some of the societal system that hinders even acceptance at the local level of women leading the peace process or representing the community in the peace process as mediator or negotiator. And of course, in a more practical dimension is the lacking of political will, budget constraint, and structural deficiency that we have at national level and also at the local level that are, of course, present challenge for women to have an access to the peace processes. So yes, WPS agenda has becoming more relevant. We need to have a more broader, balanced, sustained, and multi-layered approach. If we look at the multidimensional security challenge that I mentioned earlier. Now, in the region, we do have made some way forward. That's why I appreciate my colleague from ASEAN who make a courageous step on promoting the issue. We have launched the AWPR 2 years ago, and we also start with the leadership of Ibu Retno has start organizing regional training on VPS. As I mentioned earlier, that women need to be equipped to be able to deliver, to be able to voice their concern, to be able to gain credibility and also showing competence among their male counterpart in the peace negotiation. Now, how we are going to move forward? Let's see. So, what should we do in order to take the momentum of the 20th anniversary of 1325, but also building upon some of the foundation that we have made in the last 2 years. Now again, it go back to the basic because as I mentioned earlier, some of the challenge that we have is very much traditional. We are dealing about social system. So raising awareness of the community is becoming one of the most important work that we need to be done on inclusion of women, not only in peace building, but also recognition that woman leadership in the community should be promoted. And of course, woman empowerment should be at the heart of ensuring their meaningful participation. Now, we need to make sure that women have access to some of the basic rights from education, from health, from right to be involved in economic activities. Those are the key issues that ensure women are empowered to be able to be able to lead their communities in the peace process. And also we have to make sure that every peace process and every effort to address security challenge should based on the principle of inclusiveness, be it in mediation, be it when we're dealing with issue like POC, where most of the victims, for example, trafficking in person are women. So inclusivity and the participation of women in the planning decision making has to be one of the checklists as well. And of course, ensuring that all members of the ASEAN countries are support and also promote the network of women negotiators by nominating their representative and also a potential women leader in some of the training in the seminar that we held today. This is, I think, at the most practical level that ASEAN member country can do to promote and to take the benefit of the momentum of the 20th anniversary of WPS. I think that's it. I know maybe I'm taking too much time. Thank you, Pak Cherry. Thank you. Masa sih? Kayaknya rada kemarin.
The need for regional awareness raising campaign and also empowerment. I'd like to highlight that empowerment of women is also the theme of Vietnam's chairmanship in ASEAN this year. And during the previous summit last week, actually, Foreign Minister Retno attended a special session on women empowerment in digital age, in digital era. So, but I also highlight one of the key element which is relevant for me in my work daily, which is to include women in mediation. I think that is an important point. And for me, as director for ASEAN Political Security Cooperation, this is a point that we need to raise and again and again implement practically on how to implement this principle of inclusiveness in mediation, particularly in ASEAN and in Southeast Asia region in general. Mm, with that, I'd like to move on to our second speaker, which is Mrs. Mo Tuzar. Mrs. Mo Tuzar is coordinator of the Myanmar Studies program of ISAS, Yusof Ishak Institute, and she's also a member of ASEAN Women for Peace Registry. Please, you have the screen. Thank you.
Thank you, Cherry. Very good afternoon to everyone present virtually at this very important web seminar on a topic that I would like to say it is a topic, it is an idea, it is a priority whose time has come for this region, for Southeast Asia, for ASEAN. I would like to thank Jerry for the kind introduction, but I'd also like to add to that because before I started coordinating the Myanmar Studies program at ICS, I was a member of the Institute's ASEAN Studies Center, building on the experience and exposure that I had of about serving almost 10 years at the ASEAN Secretariat in the Human Development Unit, where women's issues and concerns were one of the areas and priorities that I coordinated among the 10 member states of ASEAN. Um, so this is a topic that is very close to my heart, and a topic that I am continually seized with. I'd also like to thank Ibu Grata, the previous speaker, who mentioned the launch of the Global Alliance for Women's Mediators Networks. I had the honor to be the voice of the ASEAN Women's Peace Registry at that event, and to talk a little bit about what we are and what we are not, what we can and what we are trying to do. So in the time that I have today, I'd like to delve a bit deeper into the regional approach that the Association of Southeast Asian Nations, ASEAN, has been taking when it comes to addressing issues and concerns for women. Um, this is, I think, a topic which has been on the ASEAN agenda since the 1970s. So it's not so long after ASEAN was established um, in the late 60s, in 1967, that ASEAN actually took up the topic of women's issues and priorities. And it's been one of those, I think, topic areas that, for lack of a better description, I'd like to say has always been in a situation where there were no strong or main lobbying force. Why do I say this? Because when there was a subcommittee coordinating women's affairs in ASEAN, it came directly under the purview of two ministerial bodies. One was the foreign ministers, and the other was the ministers responsible for social welfare and development. And this has been the case for quite a long time until recently. So in 1975, when the ASEAN Subcommittee for Women was first established and holding its first meeting in 1976, the focus has been more, I would say, international rather than regional. Why do I say this? It's because straight away, the members of the ASEAN Subcommittee on Women had a view to look at what can ASEAN as a region do on this topic in addressing the international commitments made at the United Nations level. Now, the decade 1975 to 1985 was actually the UN's International Decade of Women. So, straight from the start, I think ASEAN addressing women's issues has always had the United Nations, the international objectives in mind. And this is something that has stayed with this body up to this present. So from that beginning as a subcommittee, there were quite a few iterations. It was renamed and elevated into a committee level of senior officials, and then later on, uh, that committee also found its own parent ministerial body in the form of the ASEAN Ministerial Meeting on Women, which was established in 2011. And together with that, of course, now there is this ASEAN Women for Peace Registry, which again falls under the broader rubric of political security cooperation, which is in itself, I think, quite a departure because women's issues and concerns in ASEAN have been mostly placed under what we are familiar with as the ASEAN socio-cultural community. So the recognition that this needs to be cross-sectoral and take advantage and leverage all the multi-sectoral, multi-layered dynamics is a new development that I welcome for the sake of seeing women's issues and concerns addressed at this in this more coordinated and cohesive manner in ASEAN. So all through this, the priorities that ASEAN has looked at when it comes to women usually follow the human security framework conceptually. And why do I say this? Is because looking at the activities that have been done over the years, it was either for women's advancement in the economic security area. So there were a lot of programs and initiatives related to women in development, related to helping boost women's skills and women's participation and empowerment with a view for ensuring their economic security. And the other security dimension in advancing the role of women in ASEAN related to personal security issues. For example, violence against women has been a perennial topic that policymakers, senior officials coming together to discuss ASEAN cooperation in women have talked about. So with this kind of dual objective for the advancement of women under the I would say the broader conception of human security, uh, it has not really been able to look at the kind of political security related human security concerns that has come more to the fore with the establishment of the ASEAN Women for Peace Registry. And even though the bearing in mind of the UN international objectives has been in place, it has nevertheless taken ASEAN about 18 years from the advent of United Nations Security Council Resolution 1325 um, in 2000 up to the establishment of the ASEAN Women for Peace Registry in 2018. So that has been quite a journey. And the ASEAN Women for Peace Registry itself, when it was founded in December 2018, I had the chance to talk about what it is and what it is not at the launch of the Global Alliance of Women Mediators Networks. It is not a network of mediators per se. There are women mediators in the registry, but I think the AWPR, the registry, I think it's first and foremost, it's a coalition, if you will, of women in policy, in academia, and the practitioners in the field of peace and security to give effect to the commitments of 1325. But because it is a registry trying to build and leverage on these different strengths of the cross-sectoral, multi-track, multi-level dynamics in ASEAN when it comes to addressing peace and security issues um, related to women. It therefore does not focus on mediation alone, but it is also a departure, and it is an interesting departure that the ASEAN Women for Peace Registry is not subsumed under the ASEAN socio-cultural community or the human development sector. There is a clear distinction that it needs to be within the political security community. And so this is the first time that ASEAN has raised women and peace and security issues to political security relevance and linked it to peace and reconciliation. So what the AWPR, the ASEAN Women for Peace Registry, is really this an initiative that started small but has been institutionalized as a network so that it can't really be ignored and it can just continue to grow and build on. So I think the the relevance of this all of this in the regional approach that we're talking about now with regard to the kind of challenges that ASEAN today, the region today of Southeast Asia is facing also is that all of these, of course, when we talk about the regional approach, when we talk about ASEAN, it is the 10 member states that form the intergovernmental organization that is the Association of Southeast Asian Nations. So by the very nature of ASEAN then, countries in Southeast Asia, such as Timor-Leste, and ASEAN's long-standing observer partner, the Papua New Guinea, are one step removed from these ASEAN processes. But there is much to share and learn among all the nations in this region. And I think that is where I guess having a conceptualization of something that encompasses Southeast Asia as a region and looking at how that can be further moved forward is something worth considering. Also, of course, when we start talking about ASEAN or thinking about ASEAN, I think the knee-jerk reaction of many people who are more or less familiar with ASEAN will start thinking about ASEAN's quote-unquote house rules, non-interference, consensus-based. But I think it's also important to I think understand that everything in ASEAN, what is committed to regionally, has a national implementation responsibility. And I think we are starting to see this more and more in the area of WPS, where countries have started to develop national action plans. And this is, I think, a practice that most of the states in ASEAN will need to consider taking the lead from the countries that have taken the first step. But another characteristic of ASEAN, and those of us working within the ASEAN framework are familiar with this, of course, despite all these house rules, ASEAN can be flexible and consultative. And I think this is where building on the existing relationships within ASEAN, the bilateral relationships, the trilaterals, under the ASEAN rubric or framework comes in, because I think it establishes a kind of a comfort zone for the various member states to learn and share and build capacities for change. But of course, all of this takes time, and I think sometimes that has been the biggest gripe of all of us who have dealt with ASEAN processes and procedures. Most of the initiatives do take quite a considerable gestation process. So, with all the commitment and will in the world, results sometimes are not immediate. So it takes patience and persistence to see things through. And this is where I think the role of champions is important. Most of the priorities and initiatives in ASEAN have come to the regional table and stayed on the regional table with a very persistent effort of champions among the member states who have taken up the cause and who want to see a certain priority progress. So in the context of the topic that we're discussing today, it is very much heartening to see Indonesia, one of the founding members of ASEAN, taking this up to bring it together in a more coordinated and integrated manner, because mediation matters. It matters very much. And when we talk about mediation, the kind of mediation challenges that women face every day across a wide variety of circumstances, it can be divorce proceedings, it can be getting child custody, it can be trying to settle family disagreements or small claims issues or business matters, and or even settling community problems. But we do not usually talk about how mediation by the women, for the women, in areas, in conflict areas and zones come to the fore. And this is important because there are conflicts in the region and there are people, communities adversely affected by these conflicts. Women are among those that are most adversely affected by these conflicts. The speaker before me has also outlined some of these emerging challenges in the form of international organized crime and terrorism. I'd like to look at also, in terms of these emerging challenges, how women's role in post-conflict peace building and reconciliation can be something that women negotiators and mediators can have more of a role and input. As a result of all of these conflicts that have beset some of the ASEAN member countries, I think there have been women who have not just been the targets of violence, but because of these acts of violence and the result of that, they have also become heads of household. They have become the heads of single parent households. And so therefore there is this new, I think, dynamic to the kind of economic security and personal security that needs to be, I think, further mediated and negotiated from the displacement that have been caused by conflicts and, of course, natural disasters. And I think this is where ASEAN's forte in helping to deal with or coordinate or manage the humanitarian dimension of these human security issues could provide a platform or a venue for many of the expertise and skill existing in this region in the form of women mediators and negotiators to address these emerging concerns in the area of human security for women across the ASEAN region. I'll stop here and perhaps some of the points that I've raised could be further threshed out during the question and answer. Shall I turn the screen back to Pak Cherry?
Yes, thank you. Can you hear me? Yes. Sorry, we are having a slight technical problem, but anyway, I'll listen very carefully to what Ms. Mo mentioned in her presentation. I took note of the fact that indeed women issues in ASEAN has been traditionally falls within the so-called ASEAN sociocultural community pillar. And I agree fully that currently there is a recognition of the need for a multi-sectoral approach, especially with regard to the women issue of women peace and security. That's why Indonesia, through Minister Retno last week, as we know that we are now undertaking a midterm review of the ASEAN political security blueprint implementation. So Indonesia made a point that when we look at the ASEAN political security community blueprint, there is no mention of the issue of human peace and security. So that's why Indonesia highlighted this omission and would like to include the issue in the midterm review. And of course, understandably, as you mentioned, house rules is or in ASEAN, it's called processes is sometimes a barrier for progress, but indeed, we understand that. That's why probably this is another breakthrough that we would like this forum not to be restricted to ASEAN only, but we call it a Southeast Asia initiative to include not only the 10 ASEAN member states, but also Papua New Guinea and Timor-Leste. And the members should not be representative only from their governments, but also individuals, experts. So the so-called second track, I think that is a comfort level for everyone. And indeed, Indonesia put emphasis and put priority on the issue. That's why we undertake this initiative. With that, I'd like to ask Dr. Nolin Heiser, who will share with us the experience at the multilateral level. Dr. Nolin Heiser is a member of the UN Secretary General's High-Level Advisory Board on Mediation. So probably she could share with us how this development in the region is affected and will affect eventually the developments at the multilateral level. Please, Dr. Heiser, you have the screen.
Thank you very much, Pak Cherry. First of all, thank you for the organizers for organizing this very important meeting as we celebrate the 20th anniversary of 1325. And my special thanks goes to Foreign Minister Retno for the leadership that she's playing in this. She's indeed a great champion. I was privileged as the Executive Director of UNIFEM, the United Nations Women's Fund, to help with the establishment of 1325. This is a legally binding international framework that have shifted the focus from military security to human security in sustaining peace. And as we have heard from our two speakers, and it's a real joy to be with all the panelists, we have heard that this is based on 4 pillars: on protection, prevention, participation, peace building, and recovery. Today, I will focus on the importance of women mediators in sustaining peace and security, and of some of the emerging issues on the UN Secretary General's High-Level Advisory Board on mediation, of which I'm a member. So on the 20th anniversary of 1325, mediation is still a male-dominated field. I mean, we have heard figures from Foreign Minister and from Greta. Only 2% of chief peace mediators, 9% or 13% of peace negotiators, and 4% of signatories to peace agreement are women. Hence, this meeting today is indeed very timely. So let me address 2 questions. Why is it so important for women to participate in peacemaking? And how can we ensure that women participate meaningfully at the peace table? Now, when it comes to peacemaking, male mediators fully understand military security, and they frequently perceive the peace process as ceasefires and the silencing of guns, often at the expense of long-term peace building. Therefore, women are excluded from that peace table. Instead, warring parties are invited to the peace talks, even when ceasefires and peace agreements are violated. And today we recognize that peace is more than the absence of violence. If we want sustainable peace, and this is what we're talking about, we need to address the roots of conflicts. And the roots of conflicts are multidimensional, involving economic, social, and political forces. Resolving conflicts, peace building, and state building must therefore be addressed within a more holistic framework that integrates human security, human development, and human rights. A more balanced group involved in formal peacemaking can better address the societal grievances that have escalated into conflict, and they can identify the various demands for political, social, and economic change. Therefore, the first lesson that we have learned over the last 20 years is that inclusive peace processes are more likely to lead to lasting peace. Now, including women of diverse backgrounds in the political decision-making processes that brings a country from war to peace allows different perspectives to be articulated in critical discussions about accountable governance and also what a peaceful and just society should look like. And so we have learned a second lesson, that peace agreements that are responsive to the specific needs of women and girls, men and boys, contribute to sustainable peace. For example, women's rights to inheritance and land, health, education, and employment are critical for recovery and sustaining peace. I myself was involved with the Rwanda situation, and there when the women became members of parliament, they changed the law and women were able to own land and to inherit property. What did this do? It actually revived the agricultural sector immediately and provided food security and also economic security for most of the families at that time recovering from conflict. Now, addressing the problems of sexual violence, as well as the underlying inequalities that render women and girls vulnerable, is crucial if we want to shift to a future for upholding justice, restores confidence, and transforms institutions to provide greater security and support the rebuilding of communities and lives. In Asia, I've been very much involved with Afghanistan for a very long time. And at that time, just after the fall of the Taliban, we helped to negotiate that the Loyal Jilga, or the Grand Assembly at that time, that was rebuilding the new constitution for the recovery process, included women. And we helped them and supported them to make sure that in that agreement and in that process, they were able to bring forth the agreement that women were equal citizens of the country. And that for us, for those who have equal citizenship, it seems like a common sense thing. But for most people, it is not equal. And therefore, the importance of including that is so critical. Now, my second question that I said I was going to address is, how can we ensure that women participate meaningfully at the peace table? And also, how do we increase the role of women as mediators? Now, to ensure that women participate in peace processes, the UN has included support for women at the peace table in the TOR of every mediator and envoy, especially after 1325. The 2012 guidance, UN guidance for effective mediation, recognizes that women are powerful allies for any peace process. In its advice for UN mediators, the guide exerts that, and let me quote, "Women leaders and women's groups are often effective in peacemaking at community levels and should therefore be more strongly linked to the high-level mediation process." Now, it all sounds very good. This, of course, seeks to forge stronger links between what is often regarded as the software of peace building by women at the community level and the hardware of peacemaking done by men at the international level. With 1325, the Security Council has also mandated that the chief mediators regularly report on their consultation and negotiations with women to the Security Council. But this is not enough. There is still a very long way to go. It is not just about consultations and negotiations with women or even the inclusion of women. We need to move away from a male-dominated approach to peacemaking and to reconstruct the process to not only be more inclusive, but to allow more meaningful participation and leadership of women to bring about agreements that help to reduce the inequalities and lack of accountability that are often at the heart of the conflict. And this is not the software of peacemaking. It is the roots, addressing the roots of the conflict and finding ways of coming up with solutions. So it is indeed time to have more women as mediators. And I'm happy to learn that one of the objectives of this meeting is to explore the setting up of a Southeast Asian Women Mediation Network. Having a women's mediation network will allow more women to be appointed as lead mediators. It will allow us to aim for gender parity in mediation support teams, to ensure that all members have a good understanding of the gender dimensions of their thematic or geographical areas of expertise, and to organize context-specific gender and inclusion workshops for the mediation teams at the start of the mediation process and when specific issues of conflicts are being negotiated. So now let me shift to the second focus that I was asked to look at, and this was the emerging issues on the UN's Secretary General's high-level advisory board on mediation. And I want to say that I'm looking at this in the context of the COVID-19 era. The key message that comes out of this advisory board on mediation is that the pandemic is more than a health crisis. It is an economic crisis, a humanitarian crisis, a security crisis, and a human rights crisis. It has affected us as individuals, as families, and as societies. This crisis has highlighted how fragile we are within and among our nations. Our response has to involve remaking and reimagining the very structures of societies that create vulnerabilities, and also the ways in which countries cooperate for the common good. Coming out of this crisis will require a whole of society approach, a whole of government approach, and a whole of the world approach. Let me just highlight very quickly 4 of the emerging issues that have come out onto our board, our advisory board. First, the global ceasefire. The United Nations Secretary General's call for a global ceasefire, which he issued on the 23rd of March, urges warring parties in all corners of the world to pull back from hostilities. This will help create a humanitarian pause and corridors for life-saving aid, and also to open windows for diplomacy and bring hope to those who are most vulnerable. The appeal has resonated widely and widely supported in ASEAN as well, and it has been endorsed by nearly 180 member states, 20 armed movements, and more than 800 civil society organizations. Our worry, however, is that at the country level, the tentative steps away from violence have been fragile. With many ceasefires now elapsing or being reversed, and in a number of conflict contexts, violence has in fact intensified. The second issue that the Secretary General stressed a lot is the ending violence everywhere, including in the home, ending violence against women. The Secretary General has urged all members to make the prevention agenda a critical part of this process, and the redress of violence against women as a key part of their national response plans. On the 5th of April, he issued a global call emphasizing the need for an end to all forms of violence against women, not just in conflict situations, but everywhere, including in the home, especially during this pandemic when people are locked in. Now, the third issue that came up in many of our discussions is the combating of misinformation and hate speech. The Secretary General has appealed for an all-out effort to end online hate speech globally and to fight the stigma, the discrimination, the racism, and the xenophobia created by this pandemic. And in the context of COVID-19, it is extremely important for political leaders not to engage in identity and divisive politics, but to show solidarity with all members of society. This is the time to urgently promote social cohesion and invest in community-led resistance and response system. The other issue, which was a major issue, is looking at people on the move. The impact of COVID-19 is especially hard for millions of people on the move, such as low-wage migrants, undocumented migrants, victims of trafficking in persons, as well as refugees and internally displaced persons fleeing persecution, war, violence, and human rights violation. In fact, today, the number of refugees and displaced people actually is about 80 million, the worst since Second World War. The tightening of border controls, travel restrictions, or limitations on freedom of movement have complicated their access to protection measures, as we are now witnessing with hundreds of Rohingya refugees stranded and dying at sea. Many refugees are women, female-headed households, single-headed households, and girls who are forced into child marriage because of the unbearable situation that they find themselves in. In many of our countries, low-wage migrants and undocumented migrants are at greatest risk to the virus because they are confined to living situations that are overcrowded with poor sanitations. Unfortunately, raids are being carried out to round up these workers, deepening the stigmatization and the human tragedy to their already precarious situation. I think we need to remind ourselves that no one is safe until everyone is safe. So let me conclude by saying that we need a recovery that builds back better. A comprehensive recovery process that builds back better leads to a more equal, inclusive, resilient, and sustainable economies and societies, as well as an international system that can protect and deliver on critical global public goods. And this framework is important not just in the situation of the pandemic and the type of multiple crises that we see ourselves in, but also in conflict situations, in climate change situation, as well as natural disasters, of the idea of how do we build back better in our recovery. And this is a tremendous opportunity to promote the complementarities between the ASEAN Community Vision 2025 and the United Nations 2030 Agenda for Sustainable Development under the ASEAN UN Partnership Framework that I was very, very happy to also be a champion of when I was the Executive Secretary of the Regional Commission for Asia and the Pacific. Now, the UN stands ready to work together with ASEAN towards a recovery that is people-centered and planet-sensitive. This is indeed our opportunity to address the climate crisis, our conflicts, inequality of all kinds, and gaps in our social protection system, inclusion and resilience, because at the end of the day, we have to give hope to all our people, leaving no one behind. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Dr. Norin. And thank you for raising some very pertinent issues and questions, which is very relevant in the discussion in ASEAN nowadays. I'd like to highlight some of them, such as the emergence of or evolving non-traditional security threats, which is now COVID-19 is pretty much dominate our discussions in the region as well in the world. And you highlighted that this is indeed a security and human rights issue. And I think relevant ASEAN bodies is discussing about the impact of this COVID-19 on human rights, security, and security, particularly the right to health, for example. And you asked a question to us about the follow-up of the call from the Secretary General on the global ceasefire. So I think that is also an important question, and it resonates in the region as well. That is being discussed as ASEAN is formulating and implementing its regional efforts to address and mitigate the impact of COVID-19. I think what you raise is an important element, which is how ASEAN or probably in broader region in Southeast Asia can address the impact of COVID-19, taking into account the perspective and the special needs of women and children, especially. And also, you highlight the issue of people on the move. People on the move is also a very deeply discussed in ASEAN. Now we're discussing about the possibility of establishing travel corridors or travel bubbles. I think this will raise the issue of certain groups of people that you mentioned, for example, migrant workers, are they included or not? How about women migrant workers? How about their special needs and how to protect them from becoming victims of trafficking, for example, during this difficult time of COVID-19 pandemics? Those are questions that probably we can explore more during the question and answer session. But before that, I think I would like to give the screen to our last speaker, Dr. Fitriani Bintang Timur from the Center for Strategic and International Studies in Jakarta, who will do case studies of two countries in Southeast Asia, Indonesia and the Philippines, on the issue of women, peace and security, and how these issues is incorporated in the national plan. Please, you have the screen.
Thank you for having me. Good afternoon. Again, thank you, the Indonesian Ministry of Foreign Affairs, for holding this very timely webinar on the new and emerging women, peace and security issue in Southeast Asia, especially the needs for pushing for more women negotiator and mediator. Very honored and privileged to be here. As the last speaker, I would be very benefited by the previous speakers already mentioned what is the concept of women, peace and security, as well as why is it very important to have a women negotiator and mediator. If I may request to have my slide shown on the screen, I would be able to give a presentation on more of the academic boring perspective of, but really tangible, and I think it's useful in terms of how women, peace and security as a concept and agenda can be bring down to earth in an implementable action plan, both regional and national. As well as I would highlight the emerging issues that already been given the basic illustrated by Dr. Nolan Hazer, how the international call by the UN to focus on this emerging issue and the pandemic and also several other issues. Next, please. First, I want to share with you that the importance of Women, Peace and Security Agenda platform is built not only by the resolution 1325. Yes, it is the first resolution on women, peace and security 20 years ago, but it is since then built. And we have several resolution that actually stresses the need to have women appointed as high-level mediators and part of the mediators team. In 2009, the resolution 2013 already also recognized the need to ensure women participation in all aspects of mediation. Again, the call is stated the request to all member states to include women participation, meaningful participation in negotiating the peace talk. And when we talk about the peace talk, it's whole lot of like a long spectrum from the pre-negotiation, like setting up the situation that is conducive for negotiation. Setting up the peace agreement as being requested and actually agreeing on the details of the negotiation and addressing, hopefully in the negotiation, we'll talk about addressing the root causes of the conflict, and the negotiation will hopefully continues to the implementation of peace agreement and then continue on the peace building. And it's a whole long spectrum. And last year, as part of Indonesia, non-permanent membership non-permanent membership at the United Nations Security Council able to push for another resolution that actually demanded state to create enabling environment for the community of women peace builder. And hence, this is something that we actually can build on, how the actually need of women negotiator and mediator as how the conflict evolves and post-conflict development evolve. If I can continue. The next slide, please. This already been portrayed. This data is the data in 2008. CSI has conducted research on how women, peace and security situation in the region. And this is the international outlook. And the data is shown to you as also mentioned by Ibu Minister Retno Marsudi, Ibu Grata, and other speakers. But in Southeast Asia, in the ASEAN region, although we have several peace agreements, the Indochine peace agreement, the Aceh peace agreement, as well as the Moro peace agreement, is only one a peace agreement that involve women as signatories, and that is the result of the women peace and security agenda pushed forward, adopted by the national level. And how does actually women, peace and security agenda actually being brought to the regional and national level? If I can ask for my next slide to be shown. It's done by member state agree to the agenda and adopt the agenda through their national action plan, and also regional groups of countries actually agree to have a regional action plan and pushing forward how women are being included, empowered as part of the solution and the creation of peace. However, as we see, not all countries actually, they probably mention about women, peace and security, but having a national action plan is actually the tangible and rigid form of how a country would agree and adopt it as a national legislation that would actually allocate political will as well as the budget to do so, to do the protection, to do the empowerment and relief and recovery. And as Ibu Greta rightly mentioned, the challenge is to actually realize that women, peace and security, to put women as part of the solution and not only as the victim, making women voice heard is actually budget constraint. Out of the 81 countries that have national action plan, only 18 countries that allocated the budget. And not all the region has adopted. This is on the right side, we see, I actually make a list down on the country that has national action plan and put them in the region, and Asia Pacific is not doing very bad. But of course, that number, we never actually need to believe in number. We need to believe in the quality. How is the realization of the national action plan is implemented. But at least it's good to have the commitment of having national action plan. And this country actually committed to actually make women, peace and security as part as their legislation process, pushing women to be part of the legislation, pushing women budget, sensitive gender budgeting, as well as having the methodological of reporting. So once a country have a national action plan, it would allow them to have monitoring and evaluation tools that would actually been reported to the UN, whether this country actually have implemented and how far they actually have implemented and empowered women, as for example, pushing them as a, in our case right now is as a mediator and peace negotiator. I would like to step on the regional, how the region can actually push state level to adopt a national action plan, if I may have the next slide. As the participant of this workshop would actually include diplomats from Papua New Guinea and Timor-Leste, I would actually raise the example of the regional adoption of women, peace and security. Actually, the Pacific Islands, through the Pacific Island Forum, already have a regional action plan on women, peace and security almost a decade ago, 8 years ago. And it translated to the policy implementation. Although we know not all the member states have a national action plan. It's pushed by the champion, Australia and New Zealand, and also currently Timor-Leste actually have the national action plan. And last year they conducted Women, Peace and Security Summit that's also pushed by the champion. So it's really important. I second Ms. Motuzar that how having champion is actually really important to normalize this agenda, to make it as a norm. I mean, normalized. Meanwhile, in ASEAN, it's a slow adoption of the women, peace, and security, especially with the concern of how women are being recruited in the violent extremism side. And actually it sparked the realization that if the terrorist group are actually empowering women, why we as a country don't actually recognize this as a driving force and actually seeing women as an agent of peace, seeing women as a mediator, negotiator in peace agreement, and so on and so forth. And then ASEAN endorsed a joint statement on promoting world peace and security, and conduct in 2017 conduct regional dialogue. And last year, Indonesia pushed forward with the regional training of women peace security to diplomats, and having also the first regional symposium. This year, 2020, is one decade of ACWC, ASEAN Commission of the Protection and Promotion Right of Women and Children, and ACWC actually conducted this year a research on how to push forward national adaptation of women, peace, and security. Unfortunately, we have COVID this year, but I'm looking forward to ACWC study this year. If I may continue to the next section. This is actually collated of how the progress of the countries in ASEAN until they actually came up with national action plan. Of course, this is a non-exhaustive list. I would like to try to fill in all this table, but it will be very, very small. But as I can show you how having a national action plan would actually push a country to actually have a fulfilled pillar from participation, protection, prevention, and relief recovery. What really heartened me is to know that the country that is engaged in the region actually know the importance of having or empowering women as for example, even countries not all countries in the region have a legislated women, peace, and security national action plan. And the reason is because the concern from the interview I conduct with the with the certain member state of why they don't have or develop a rigid national action plan is because they're concerned that the country is considered conflict area, although it's not like that, you know. European Union member actually having national action plan because they want to actually empower their women to be peacekeeper, to be agent of peace elsewhere. That's why they have national action plan on women, peace, security, to create peace elsewhere in the world, in the region, as part as their international responsibility of creating peace and stability and security. But and in this table, we see how different countries actually take a localization context of how women, peace, and security is. And they have, of course, limitation in terms of how they can adopt the women, peace, and security agenda and pillars to their legislation, and that would translate to national action plan. I'm not going to repeat or read all of the achievement that this ASEAN member state, as well as Papua New Guinea and Timor-Leste that observed the regional organization ASEAN here, that you can also read. But I would, in the next slide, will share with you how Indonesia actually contextualize the women, peace, security agenda as Indonesia own with local ownership national plan of action. And we in Indonesia, we take into consideration the Beijing Platform of Action 1995, the Women, Peace, and Security Resolution 1325, then the General Recommendation 13 and of CEDAW, as well as we have to actually match it with the existing regulation national law legislation, that is the law of social conflict management. And instead of the 4 pillar that the women, peace and security have, we have 3 pillars. We have conflict prevention, handling conflict and victim of gender-based violence, and participation on empowerment of women and girls. And from the national action plan, we actually allocate 7 area, conflict and peace building conflict prone and peace building prospect area in our Indonesian region, and create a local action plan of our women peace agenda. So, but the plan of having a national action plan is full of negotiating by itself. It takes 7 years of negotiation, and with the lead of Ministry of Women Empowerment and Child Protection as a lead negotiator. And we have a change of name as the National Action Plan contextualized to the protection National Action Plan on Protection and Empowerment of Women and Children in Social Conflict. That would actually focus on having training for trainings as for women peace negotiator, both in national and local context. That is really good. And we have the empowerment of a police officer that is also in line, aside from the law of social conflict management, as well as domestic violence act that requires all the police stations have at least 1 woman, and hopefully more, to have a woman desk to deal with the domestic violence. That will then push forward this women peace and security, push forward the need for more female police officer. That would actually enable Indonesia to have more female police officer that can be deployed internationally as peacekeeper. So that is the connection. And how Indonesia also, because of the trainer of women peace negotiator, we can have the peace negotiator that actually previously negotiate the peace agreement in Aceh to actually help the peace negotiation in other Southeast Asian countries. So, for example, in Thailand, and actually share the skill with the training in the Manila or in the Philippines, and then the more peace agreement and the current development. So that's how Indonesia conducted it. And so, but of course, every country is different by itself, and need to be tailored by the needs and situation of each country. Legislation and situation. Now, I also want to raise what actually the National Action Plan needs to take into consideration. That is the emerging issues, because National Action Plan would actually, the ideal one, have a budget allocation in addressing certain issues. And if I can go to the next slide, is the emerging issue that I would ask for the raise of attention for the policymaker of the current trend, at least in the region or not Indonesia, to actually focus on in developing its national action plan. Indonesia is currently drafting its second national action plan on women, peace and security, because the first action plan is already implemented. And we built upon that first national action plan as the second national action plan is developing, just like the Philippines actually already implementing its second national action plan of women, peace and security. And the issue, there's a 3 issue that I raised, which is the radicalization, the issue of natural disaster and the pandemic, for example, the COVID-19 issue. Next. And I will just go be very fast because Dr. Nulan has already highlighted several issues before. So the issue of the radicalization, putting women as an agent of peace, partly so very important as women as peace negotiator and mediators. And the post-2014, the rise of ISIS, that seeing the trend of in terrorism, determined by Professor Ruhaini Zuhayatin from University of Islamic National University of Kalijaga, from the backyard terrorism to the dining room. This is very stereotype. What does it mean? Like previously, terrorism was considered as a male-dominated field, and now we have seen how women actually being part and taken of this really unpalatable act, and then we see the position of needing to move beyond stereotype and seeing how women actually can be an agent of peace, and not seeing them as only as women part of the violent extremism group that are raising the question why they're like that, but actually addressing their need, empowering their need, and see them of what they need. Maybe there are women in prone areas actually needed more protection, relief, and recovery help. Maybe there are women survivors and that they need to be addressed, voice needs to be heard, as well as the parties returnees that was previously was influenced by ISIS. But this is a reality that this region has, and I think the National Action Plan, both national and regional, need to say something of this prevalent of issue. Next. The region also suffer from the high impact of national disaster, and for women, the issue of being left behind because of the slow and inaccurate damage assessment, causing tension and violence, and sometimes making them unheard and unseen. So it is important to actually point it out, the female champion of how women can actually help the post disaster relief and recovery, and this is can be part of women, peace and security. The next slide is an issue of the pandemic. We heard that the UN say women make up the 70% of health and social workers, and very demanding caregiving need increase. But this pandemic also limit the mobilities that give challenge to the work of mediator and negotiator, especially because they're confined and in the lockdown. And as part of the cyber mediation network that are initiated by the United Nations Politics and Peace Building Affairs, there's a call of how to provide training for female negotiator to actually increase their technological savviness to actually able to bring the community together through online and pushing forward to provide a more comprehensive forward-looking solution more than just the ceasefire agreement. I guess I speak more than my time allocated now. I return the screen to the moderator. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Fitriani. That was really interesting on the lesson learned, and particularly on how to contextualize the issue of women, peace and security through national plan of action. I think it is also an important element that we should continue on discussing this issue in depth. So our region could be the champion in the issue. With that, participants, speakers, ladies and gentlemen, we will now begin our question and answer session. As mentioned earlier by the MC during the presentation, participants joining our Zoom webinar and audience who are watching our webinar through live streaming from YouTube have sent their questions through the chat or comment feature of the platform. And I can see the enthusiasm of our participants and audience from the Q&A sent to us, but however, due to limited time, unfortunately, we will not be able to answer all questions. So I will read you the first question to all speakers. Why hasn't the resolution 1320 contributed to significant increase in the number of women negotiators and mediators, and what can be done to increase to address this challenge? Yes, I give the screen to our speakers who would take the first opportunity to answer that. Yes. Dr. Nolin, I think you should unmute the. You should unmute first.
All right, okay. Just let me quickly say that after 1325, what we have tried to do was to make it the implementation side, the whole of the UN system approach, and also the whole of the member state approach. But of course, this is a major transformation. I think we need to understand that 1325 was a huge mindset change. And it also involved a change in practice if we want to locate it in the reality of women's life and the life of our communities. So it really took some time for people to understand. And I saw over the last 20 years some very significant shifts, which makes me extremely helpful, even if in ASEAN it has taken us almost 18 years. But still, the fact that we are now engaged with this is very, very hopeful. But over that 20 years period, first, there was resistance. I have to tell you, when I was trying to establish 1325, it was not like with an open arm, come, we will just invite you in. There was a lot of mindset change and also commitment in terms of what does it mean in terms of implementation. So it started off first with resistance, and then with some kind of an engagement. Let's engage maybe civil society a little bit. Let's have some token women. Let's try to make it look like we're doing something, but not really. So it took a while. But now, there is, as I mentioned earlier, the need to engage women in all the TOR of peace mediators as well as envoys that are UN appointed. But we're going even beyond this by saying, all right, but over the last 20 years, we've learned some very critical lessons that women, we need to have women as mediators and as chief mediators, because it makes a major difference. Many of the root causes of conflicts are being addressed. The issue of sustainable peace is being addressed. But I have to say, I'm actually very encouraged, because if you look, I mean, it's one of the hardest arena. We are talking about a male-dominated arena, right? One of the hardest are the peacekeepers, right? And peacekeeping was a protected enclave, if you like. And today we've seen how women peacekeepers are coming in and what a difference they have made. And it is a very great, significant, hopeful sign that the Undersecretary General of the Peacekeeping Operations have actually said that this was a very critical development. And that, of course, the Secretary General has been supporting this as well. And the member states are responding. When I was involved with the situation in Liberia, immediately after 1325, India sent a full troop of women police officers into Liberia. You know, and because at that time, Liberia had the first women president, Ellen Johnson Sirleaf. So I have to say that it's not like nothing is being done. Change takes time. A major transformation takes even greater time. But as we say, we have to bring all our forces together to work if we want real change to not just happen, but be sustained, and also to upscale it in a bigger way.
Dr. Norin, now I give the screen to Ibu Grata.
I absolutely agree with you, Nolin, Dr. Heiser. I absolutely agree. I mean, 20 years ago, when we introduced the resolution and we faced the obstacle, the amount of obstacle need to be overcome just to adopt the resolution. What we are achieving so far, I think, is a tremendous progress made by WPS. And again, I just want to underline what you're saying, that the work of implementing the commitment in WPS, a lot of the amount of work need to be done even at the national level. It's huge, because when we start talking about ensuring women participation, we have to address all the basic principles that can support those kind of substantial and meaningful participation. We are not talking about changing the mindset, trying to challenge the patriarchal system, but also making sure there is a legal substantive framework to support women participation. That's why the presentation for my colleague Fitri, when she mentioning some of the legal framework, even the program under National Action Plan that needed to be there to ensure that women can participate, has to be there. We have to, for example, we have to ensure that women are protected by law from violence. They have a full access for education, access for health, and as well as that government has a clear unity in how they develop program in ensuring the link of women in development, for example. So there's a lot of amount of work need to be done just to ensure that women are empowered to be participate. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Ibu Grata. Mrs. Mo, please.
Very shortly, I would just like to add my endorsement to what Dr. Nolin and Ibu Grata have mentioned. But it's also, I think, this impatience is good, because it actually shows where the perseverance comes in. I think I mentioned earlier in my remarks about the long gestation process that regional organizations such as ASEAN go through, but it needs patience and perseverance. So you can't talk about something if it's not on the regional agenda. And so it needs that championship and perseverance to get something onto the regional agenda. And then once it gets onto the regional discussion agenda, we also need that consistent championship to continue sustaining discussion on this to get somewhere. And that's how 1325, as Dr. Nolin explained, got onto the UN agenda and became a resolution. But even then, 18 years later, we're still finding gaps. So I think the ASEAN approach really is, because there are so many different levels and points of entry where the different member countries are coming from, starting small as a first step is always what ASEAN does. But then I think we build on that, and then we try to learn from what that's going on. So I think it's basically, I would see it as it's a step taken forward. It may be a small step, but it is a firm step forward that we need to now continue on.
Thank you. If there is no other addition, I think we can move on to the second question posed by our participants and audience. It seems to me that they are very interested with the non-traditional security issues. So many questions are posed to us on that issue, non-traditional security issues. So I would like to highlight two issues. I think it was mentioned by Dr. Fitriani. The question is, what is the role of women as negotiators and mediators in the issue of violent extremism and terrorism? And also how women can contribute in the efforts to combat COVID-19. I think I will give the floor to Dr. Fitriani first.
Thank you for the question. From the Indonesia experience in engaging women as a peace process as a peace agent in their radicalization, especially in a post-Bali bombing, the way is to actually allow because, for example, the specific experience of Bali bombing was the bombing in Bali, and it was conducted for promoting a certain religion. So actually women from that religion actually come front and say, my husband is killed in that explosion, and you're saying that you're trying to promote that religion. That's not the correct way. So actually sharing how women actually being part of the concern of creating peace and prosperity doesn't need to be done by violence, because violence would actually perpetuate more violence. As Mahatma Gandhi say, the one eye for an eye will make the world blind. So actually engaging in a way more than essentialism, that women's are mother and being more mothering. Also, we can say that it's important. I mean, there are several training is done. For example, in as a peace negotiator in Mindanao, women are actually being mobilized in terms of how to build peace, and actually engaging the extremists, or people that are being dragged to the propaganda to show that it's not worthy to actually perpetuate violence to bring cause. It's better to engage in peace, and together we bring peace and prosperity to the region and the local contacts. I hope I answered.
Thank you, Dr. Fitriani. Would any of the other speakers would like to add to that? So, Ibu Grata, please.
Now, just to add that when we talk about a non-traditional security threat, I think when we talk about it within the context of peace processes, there is, of course, an understanding that non-traditional threat in this question, particularly terrorism, are part of the obstacle that need to be dealt when we would like to create a sustaining peace. So there's the understanding that yes, we need to deal with terrorism as part of an obstacle to peace. So the way we deal with terrorism has to be clear that this is something that we need to address when we are moving ahead with the peace negotiation. And the second one, this is of course within the women context, the role of women in terrorism, women vis-a-vis terrorism, which is, as I mentioned earlier, there's a lot of layers. Yes, just like in conflict, traditional conflict, women can be victim, but also women can be perpetrator, facilitator, or even supporter. So the way we're dealing with this issue is probably we could take some of the lesson learned when we are dealing with peace processes that involve a lot of different factions, including those party to conflict that involve women as part of their militia, as part of their combatant. We do have lesson in this when we're dealing, for example, with women militia, or even maybe child soldiers. There is also some lesson on how we are dealing with a specific group participating in party to conflict, or even in this regard a terrorist group, for example, that become obstacle to the peace process. Now we need also with the increasing role of women in the terrorist organization, also accentuate the necessity to have women who can speak to the other women, who can becoming agent of peace, who can negotiate with these women who are becoming radicalization actors. So you need to have women to be able to communicate what is the root causes why more women participate or supporting terrorist acts. So there is again another perfect example why we need to have women. Why we need to have women, even not only in intergovernmental way of negotiating, but also in addressing some what I call asymmetrical way of negotiating, which is dealing with parties who are not representing a government, who are representing interest group, including in this regard terrorism. So this is going to be another different discussion if you would like to talk about the way of negotiator or mediator, maybe know more about this, how we are have what the so-called formal negotiation on the peace process on the table, but also a lobby outside the room negotiating, trying to, dealing with those people who are not given access or recognition to be on the table, the asymmetrical way of negotiating. Thank you.
Thank you, Ibu Grata. Would any other speaker would like to add to what Ibu Grata and Dr. Fitriani mentioned? Yes, Dr. Nolin.
Yes, but you asked about how do we respond to this situation in the context of COVID-19. I think what COVID-19 has shown is that, firstly, women are the main caregivers. And I think it is time that we actually value the care work. It has taken so long for us to put the care economy on our policy agenda and to value it in a very deep way. And I think that is one very big area that we need to actually look at. It is so unfortunate that because of the stigma, the form of stigma and so on, some of the healthcare workers are themselves faced with violent threats because they are seen as being exposed to the virus. I think the other area is the whole area of the future of jobs. We have seen the worst fall of job, basically people being jobless. I mean, the loss of jobs is unprecedented at this time. And the areas, of course, that are being affected are in the informal sector, the people in the value chain, the small scale kind of industry. And with the recovery, it is not automatic that these groups of people will actually get new jobs unless they are educated and they are trained, especially since some of the new areas would be in the digital area, and there happen to be a major digital divide. And I think we need to take that into account in terms of the new technology. And finally, without going too far, because there is so much threat, because the bottom 40% of most of our society have been threatened and impacted, they look for scapegoats. And very often it is the migrant workers or the undocumented workers or the refugees. So there is almost an inward look. And even countries that once upon a time used to be very open and very supportive of this population now find that they have to respond to their local population and address this issue. And civil society and human rights defenders have in fact even been threatened through violence. And I think that this is a tremendous opportunity for ASEAN to come together to look at our workflows, our migrant workers flows, including the undocumented workers, the undocumented migrants. We have depended on them for our economic growth, especially in the area of construction, in the area of plantations, in the area of agriculture and food security. And I think so far, ASEAN has been very good looking at the flow of the skilled workers and trying to regulate that. But we have not looked at how do we deal collectively in our community with the undocumented workers especially. And I want to stress that unless we can stop the violence and the conflicts in our societies, we are going to displace these people and our population. And we are converting them. I mean, it's not like they come from nowhere. They come from very, very specific situation of insecurity, through violence, through economic insecurity, health insecurity. So therefore, it is absolutely critical that if we want people-centered ASEAN and a people-oriented ASEAN as envisioned in the ASEAN Charter, that these are issues that we need to take on and not just see them as non-traditional security issues, but actually issues for a more sustainable future.
Thank you, Dr. Nolin. Thank you. If there is no other addition from our speakers, I think I'd like to say that we have run of time. But before I close this session, I would like to invite our speakers to make 1 minute closing message. So it's a takeaway for our participants and audience. I think the pertinent message that you would like to convey to them on this issue. Thank you. So I will start with probably Dr. Nolin. And
All right, I would say I would focus on keeping our spirit strong and committed, and to focus very much on implementation, and implementation. And that I hope that we will be looking not just at the National Action Plan, because many of the conflicts in the ASEAN region are sub-regional conflicts, and therefore to bring it down, even eventually to local action plans, because these are very specific conflicts. And if we can actually do that and engage the local population, ASEAN will be a very, very much more peaceful. We're already a peaceful community, but I think we'll be even more peaceful and more prosperous. And I hope that we will be able to create a future of greater resilience and also of social cohesion and shared prosperity.
thank you, Dr. Nolin. And now I give the screen to Mrs. Mo. Are you still there?
Yes, I'm still here, but somehow I don't see myself. Can you hear me?
Yes, clearly. We can all hear you.
Yeah. Yes, it's very disconcerting to not see myself on the background. But what I'd like to share as my closing thoughts really is, it has taken such a long time since 1325 was put on the UN discussion agenda for ASEAN to fully embrace it on ASEAN's regional agenda. But we have finally got recognition within ASEAN that the regional coordinated action on women in peace and security issues is necessary and important, not just in one community, but across all the community pillars in ASEAN and across all the sectors, so that it has to be a multi-layered, multi-track, cross-sectoral approach. And there are so many women in Southeast Asia who are suffering, who have suffered, who are affected in different ways by the many conflicts that have occurred in the region, all the natural and man-made disasters. And some of these are still occurring in several parts of the region, or some countries in Southeast Asia. So I think women know women's needs and situation the best. And of course, that is where women mediators and women negotiators can really play an important championship role in bringing about the kind of resolution and reconciliation for all these glaring needs. Thank you. Oh, there I am again.
Yeah, now you appear. Now we all can see you and hear you clearly. And now I'll give the screen to Dr. Fitri. Fitri, please.
Thank you. It is a long process since 2000 to now, 2 decades later. But we have achieved something. And I think it is important that our achievement would not be returned back to zero. I think we need to build of the current achievement that we have, and actually for the champion to actually empower other countries and region to be also the champion and actually doing what is right. Empowering women, putting women not only to numbers, not only quantity, but also quality, meaningful participation. Because as echoing Dr. Nulin, peace is not only the absence of violence. Peace will only be sustainable if everybody, men, women, boys and girls, can enjoy it. Thank you.
Thank you. The last message is from Ibu Grata. Please, Ibu Grata.
Thank you, Pak Cherry. Now, just to look a reflection of 2 decades after we adopt WPS, I think in the last 20 years, the world has changed. Now, if we listen to the whole discussion that we have today, yes, there is the same world that we are 20 years ago, but also there is some element that makes the changes. For example, when we have discussion about non-traditional issue, we have a discussion about increasing role of women in terrorism. We also talk about the current challenge in pandemic. Yes, 20 years ago, the world is quite a little bit different than nowadays. But surprisingly, the whole discussion about WPS again reaffirmed my conviction that WPS is still relevant even after 20 years being in place, being adopted. We are still working how WPS actually can benefit us, can be implemented, and also remain valid as a tool for us to promote women participation in peace and security. And the other thing is, after 20 years, I've been dealing with women issue more than a decade. Maybe Bu Nolin and Moe has a longer time working with women issue. But I have to admit that we need to have more men talking about women issues in a perspective that are promoting solidarity and also championing women issues. I know that every time we have a discussion on women issue, there's always a lot of prominent female speaker, but it's good to hear a men who are talking women peace and security, championing women peace and security based on male perspective. That show that the paradigms have shifted, that there is also people who are male who are challenging the patriarchal system. So that's it. Just a reflection after 20 years. Thank you, Pak.
Thank you, Bu Grata. Your points is well taken. Okay, allow me to end this first session of the web seminar on the role of women negotiators and mediators in the maintenance of regional peace and security. I would like to thank all the excellent speakers and very lively discussion we had. Again and again, we underline that this issue of women, peace and security is very pertinent, and it is timely for us to reinvigorate its discussion in our region. Before I close, I would like to remind everyone that tomorrow we will have two sessions. One session in the morning. It will start at 10:30 Jakarta time or 11:30 Singapore time. The second session would be the role of women as negotiators and mediators at the peace table. So in this session, the speakers are all women who have been directly involved at the peace table, either as mediator or negotiator, and they will share their experience as women at the peace table, as well as their views and perspective. The speakers are Professor Miriam Coronel Ferrer, who chair the government panel that negotiated and signed the comprehensive agreement on the Bangsa Moro with the Moro Islamic Liberation Front in March 2014. And then Mrs. Sadia Marhaban, member of the Free Aceh Movement negotiation team in the peace talks with the government of Indonesia. And then Mrs. Leonesia Tecla da Silva, mediator for IDP's 2006 crisis reintegration process, Ministry of Social Solidarity and National Consultant for Women, Peace and Security, UN Women from Timor-Leste. And then we have Mrs. Charmaine Bakonga, Corporate Secretary of Balai Mindanao Foundation, and the last speaker is Dr. Amporn Marden, expert on the use of mediation in cases of gender-based violence in the Southern Thai province. And in the afternoon, we will have another session, the last session of our web seminar. It's on regional women mediator networks, best practices from other regions in enhancing women's meaningful participation and influence in peace processes. So in this session, we will learn from other regions on how they conduct and develop these issues. So the session will discuss the various regional women mediators networks and the experience of each network in enhancing women's meaningful participation. We will have four speakers, Mrs. Pravina Makanlaka, a member of the Steering Committee Network of African Women in Conflict Prevention and Mediation, or FEMWISE Africa. Dr. Emma Leslie, a member of the Women Mediators across the Commonwealth and Executive Director of the Center for Peace and Conflict Studies. And then Mrs. Irene Felin, head of the Mediterranean Women Mediators Network. And our last speaker is Mrs. Siri Skere, member of the Nordic Women Mediators and head of global program at NOREF, Norwegian Center for Conflict Resolution. So we will have two very interesting, exciting sessions tomorrow. I hope you all can join again tomorrow for our two sessions. With that, I'd like to close this session, and to all the Zoom webinar participants and audience on the YouTube, thank you very much for joining us. Have a nice evening. I now hand the screen back to our MC.
Thank you for all the speakers and moderator for the fruitful discussion. So we have now come to the end of the first day of our web seminar. As what the moderator have said previously, please join us again tomorrow morning for session 2 on the role of women as negotiators and mediators at the peace table, and tomorrow afternoon for session 3 about regional women mediator networks, best practices from other regions in enhancing women's meaningful participation and influence in peace processes. We are sure the discussion tomorrow will be as interesting as the ones we have today. Have a great day and see you soon tomorrow. Thank you.